Good afternoon and welcome.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome. You are joining Minnesota Communities Caring for Children webinar Supporting Children with Special Needs. This is being presented today by Mary Weaver. She is the Minnesota Communities Caring for Children Northern Director of Prevention Initiatives. We're so glad that you're doing this, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb.
Yep, my
Well,
name is,
welcome everyone.
I'm,
Yes, that was Barb Sorum,
yeah,
and she is our Southern Minnesota Director of Prevention Initiatives. So she is doing the technical aspects of things for us today. One of the things that we would like you to participate in is on your little toolbar on the side for this webinar, you can ask questions and raise your hand. And I encourage you that if you have questions that come up while I'm speaking or something you'd like to know more about, please feel free to raise your hand and type in a question in the chat box, and we will answer them as they come up. So don't be shy.
They can also raise their hand. If you ever have a question, go ahead, raise your hand, and I will let Mary know that you have a question.
So a little bit about me. I am obviously the Director of Prevention Initiatives for Northern Minnesota for Minnesota Communities Caring for Children. I am also an adoptive mother of 4 children, and several of my children have special needs. So I've learned some of these things in my own journey, as well as taking the advice and expertise from others, and hope that this is a good toolkit for you in working with any children that may have special needs. Hopefully I won't click too fast on my stuff. So one of the things that obviously impact kids with special needs or can even contribute to that is the impact of trauma in their lives. And trauma is defined as, something that threatens the life or physical integrity of the child or someone important to them, like a parent, a sibling, caregiver. Trauma causes an overwhelming sense of terror, helplessness, or horror. And the body reacts to this threat automatically with physical responses such as rapid breathing, increased heart rate, release of stress hormones from adrenaline and cortisol. And all of that over time, if it's repeated, can cause an impact on their brain development. And we have a whole series of information on adverse childhood experiences that really discuss in depth talk about the impact of trauma and adverse childhood experiences on brain development. And I'm not going to get into that too much through this, but it will touch on the things that happen afterwards. And yes, I'm a hand talker, so I apologize. Many times the special needs that kids have are invisible disabilities. They could be anything from being on the autism spectrum to prenatal exposure to drugs or alcohol, children in foster care who've experienced those traumatic experiences with their parents or in their lives. And these kids often have difficulty with bonding, inappropriate social interactions, school disruptions, oppositional behavior. And it's all stemming from these traumatic experiences or life events that have happened to them that require them to have limited skills with these things. And what I'm going to focus on is working through that, finding ways to understand behaviors and reach these children so that we can make their lives as absolutely wonderful as possible. So some of the key facts related to special needs kids is many times this isn't discovered until child care programs or school settings. Because we have such great influences with early childhood education and screenings and all of those sort of things, we can really reach these children at a younger age than ever before. And this is also the time where people are noticing these developmental delays. When you're at home with a parent, when you're a parent at home with your child, you're not necessarily comparing them to the other 3-year-olds that are around, because you aren't seeing that in that same interaction as a school setting or a child care setting is. And the effects of this can vary very greatly. Just like every child, their personalities are very different from one another. So how these children are impacted, or what those impacts are on their social interactions, their developmental delays, their emotional and physical maturities, vary by so many different degrees and ranges. And then one thing to consider is that oftentimes parents may have been impacted by traumatic events. They may have been prenatally exposed to drug or alcohol themselves. They may have other delays. They might have had a traumatic brain injury. They may have had traumatic experiences. They may have mental health issues that may have been undiagnosed. And so they may not be in the best position to function effectively in a parent role. So looking at the big picture of everything is very important when you're looking at working with these children and finding out or discovering that there may be some delays or some special needs or some different manners of support that might be necessary. So some of the common behaviors that are seen in young children are that there are developmental delays. They may have poor motor coordination and difficulty with fine or gross motor control. They may have erratic sleep behaviors. They may have learning problems, whether it's dyslexia or organizational things, easily distractible. They can become angry or frustrated often, and they can have extreme over or under sensitivity to sensory input. So noises, sounds can either be too much for them or they need even louder. As an example, my youngest son, from the time he was very little, was very extreme. Everything was bigger, louder, faster, and that was the way he could actually feel it. He's got vestibular issues where you can spin him around and around and around and around, and he'll get up and walk a straight line. So there's different things that are impacting him. This is a child that in the summer, and even to this day, he's 15 now, in the summertime, when it's 90 degrees outside, he will walk around with long sleeves and long pants on. And he'll take a shower or a bath, and it'll be like the hottest setting that my water heater will go to, which we do keep down. It just bright red, he'll come out of the tub. He needs to, the way he feels something is by over feeling it. And so he seeks out those sensory things so that he can have that extreme and feel what is happening. Kids with sorry, I move around in my seat too. Kids can often be overly friendly and indiscriminate with relationships as well. They don't see that stranger danger. They don't have those boundaries, or because they've been moved or rotated around among family members, if they've had some traumatic experiences, maybe they're in foster care, they've just kind of learned to go with the flow, and therefore they don't have those safety boundaries. So, sorry. When they get a little bit older, they have those same common problems that they had from the younger years, but then it's increased, and then they can experience more difficulties with poor social skills. They may not learn from previous experiences. They can appear to have zero common sense, and that's a frequent comment that I hear from parents, is that it's just like, kind of blows your mind that, wow, you just can't figure that something so simple out. You know, it's just common sense, and they don't seem to have it. Very often they can act like a much younger child. My kids, the sibling group of 3 that we adopted, typically has run about 3 years behind emotionally. So when they're 12 years old, they're pretty much behaving like a 9-year-old, and their reactions and responses to things are that. When they were younger, the same sort of thing. They've pretty much stuck about 3 years behind, and it's hard to remember that. You know, you see physically this child who is right on target for their age, and then they're acting emotionally so much younger that it's hard to keep that connect and understand that you need to approach it in a different way. My daughter, who is now 19, when she was like 14, 15, all her friends were very much into boys and makeup and all of that sort of stuff, and she was quite content to play dolls and Barbies with her little sister because that was where she was emotionally. And it's not an inappropriate behavior, it's just where she's at. Children with special needs can often be impulsive. They may have poor follow through. They may not have those organizational skills, that executive functioning, to help them understand and follow through with directions or assignments. Or my kids were the king and queen of doing assignments, getting their homework done, and then never turning it in and actually losing it. So then they'd be behind on things, and that was kind of that frustration again of understanding what's going on, why can you get it this far and not that far, and trying to help them and the school through that. And kids with special needs can often have difficulty understanding abstract concepts and generalizing information. So they're very kind of black and white. And like as an example, if I told one of my kids to go get their folder, they might be confused and stand there with 6 different folders, not knowing which one to get, or not even getting one because they're overwhelmed with the choices. So you need to be very kind of specific and say, I want you to get your purple folder that has the words English on top of it so that you can bring that to me. Very clear and concrete information. It helps them to process. So there's too much gray. It can be very distracting for them. And not to put everything into a negative, but there are strengths too. All kids have strengths, and sometimes children with special needs have extra strengths as well, and they can be extraordinarily friendly and likable, very outgoing, and have little anxiety about strangers, which can sometimes be a very good positive because they're not afraid to meet and try new things. They can be very verbal and chatty, socially interested, but not necessarily socially skilled. They can be helpful and hardworking. My kids were fantastic. There was a neighbor down the road who needed to have a new roof put on, so our church was doing that, and my son was, I think, probably 11 at the time, and I couldn't get him to do a chore around here for the life of me, and he would never ever volunteer to do something like that for me if I needed it. But he was more than happy to help out down there, and that little kid was up and down the ladder bringing up tools and drinks and treats for people, and getting anything that they needed, and just super helpful and hardworking. And I still hear about, I remember when Jacob did this, and just their excitement of what an awesome kid he was and how helpful and hardworking he was. And he is, most definitely, and he's improved as far as that goes. And now he's out of the house, so I don't have to stress on whether or not he's actually doing my chores. But it's they can be very, very helpful and hardworking. They really want to please. They are very determined and resilient. I mean, if you know any children that have special needs, you know that they don't know that they're limited necessarily. They are very determined to succeed with what they want to try for. They don't hold grudges. They move forward each day as a new day. They are very forgiving and willing to try again, because they know that the struggles that they have within, even if they can't verbalize it, that they are ready and willing to try again. And they want to be liked. They will do whatever they can to have friends, which can be a strength and a challenge, because they are often vulnerable to that as well. When kids get a little bit older, they realize that they can kind of take advantage of some of these children and their willingness and desire to have friends. So they might use them for money, or they might use them for things, and being mindful of that as a parent or as an educator or caregiver is very important, to see that things aren't happening that are being taken advantage of, so that their goodwill is not being used against them. So there's a lot of different ways that kids fall into the special needs category. And it kind of depends on what lens you're using. My children were prenatally exposed to drugs and alcohol. So I kind of come at it from a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder lens, and as well as attention deficit disorder. And there's lots of different lenses that you can use, and they often interact and kind of cover each other. Attention deficit disorder, autism, sensory processing, bipolar, mental health issues, depression, trauma, poverty. I mean, there's all these different things. Then when you're looking at a child, you have to be recognizing every aspect that might be impacting them. And sometimes you don't always have those answers, but you do what you can with what you know. You use those things, and remember that a child with reactive attachment disorder might also have attention deficit disorder, might also suffer from trauma, might also suffer from depression. And so knowing to use the different lenses is going to be important in best serving them and working with them and living with them. So there are some practical tips and strategies, but they are not solutions. There's no cure for a lot of this stuff. There's things that can improve and strengthen, but it's not necessarily a cure. So they're not solutions, they're just strategies. And those include, you know, having accommodations in place, having the information that you need, having communication with the people in that child's life, whether it's as a parent you're communicating with the school and understanding what's going on there, whether it's the school communicating with the parents so you can understand what's happening at home, and really partnering with the people in your child's life and having that be a partnership in every way, shape, and form so that child is succeeding. So some of the accommodations, and this is where again I say that things cannot always be fixed or cured, but we can accommodate to meet the child's needs where they're at. And that's the key theory. We want to challenge children and we want to encourage them and we want to raise that bar so that they're always trying to do that, just like we would with neurotypical children. But we also need to meet them where they're at so we can help them have those successes day to day. And if you've got a child who really wants to fit in the classroom and do homework and not be pulled out to a resource room and take tests, then do as much as you can to accommodate that. My youngest son, that was one of his accommodations in school was that for testing, in particular for math testing, he would be allowed to go to a resource room to take his tests, just so it was a little bit less hectic and distracting. This year in 9th grade, he has asked that he be allowed to take the tests with his classroom. And if he feels that he is struggling or distracted, then we'll look at it again. And so far this year, the kid has just rocked it. He has been phenomenal in getting his work done, and some of that is the maturity, but it was also meeting him where he was at and allowing him that opportunity to try something on his own, knowing that he had a support behind him in case it didn't work, and as well as to support him in trying that on his own. And that comes from information gathering. You know, what do you need to know about the child, whether you're a parent or an educator, a daycare provider, whatever your role is in this child's life, understanding the priorities of the family, and if that's what it should say instead of parents' priorities, is understanding what does the parent want? What do you want as a parent? For me, when my kids were younger, especially, it wasn't so much about what they learned in school each day as it was how they did socially. Because if socially they were off, for me and my husband, it was important. If socially they were off, everything else kind of fell apart too. So that the more they were connected with their peers and had those relationships, the better they were in the classroom, the more focused they were, the more they learned social skills. So to me, that was what was important. To others, it might be that, you know, I want my child to really understand this subject. I'm sorry. And pause. Sorry, I have dogs and I'm trying to get them to be quiet. Just a second.
That's okay. One of the pleasures, I think, of being able to work from your home and present from your home. So no worries, Mary.
I don't know what they're barking at, so the mail has already come, so it can't be that. Probably saw a squirrel. So understanding those parents' priorities, or recognizing your own priorities for your child, and what is important to you, and every person and every child and every parent and every family is going to arrive at something different. But it's recognizing that, it's sharing that with the people who are in your child's life, it's sharing that with the school, so that everybody knows what's important to you and your child. Understanding the behaviors that the child is exhibiting, that what is happening, why does it happen this way? Why does this child do this and why does this child do that? You know, especially in a classroom, it's very difficult. You've got a bunch of kids in there with all sorts of different behaviors and different strategies that might work for this one or not that one, and trying to find that balance can be very, very difficult and challenging for an educator. It's a job that I personally would not be able to do. But there are a lot of strategies that work universally for children, and I'll share some of those as we go along. And then recognizing the child's challenges and strengths. Knowing what their limitations are, what their strengths are, and really pushing that so that they are being challenged themselves, so that they are stretching their abilities and growing as much as possible. I would have not guessed this year how my son is doing in 9th grade 2 years ago. He struggled so badly. He was so disorganized. He was just incapable of doing many of the things that should have been on target for a 7th grader, that I just knew, you know, his challenges were that way. And so we put in accommodations that were designed to build his self-esteem and build his skills, so that here we are in 9th grade now, and like I said, he's just totally rocking it, and doing it all on his own. But he did that because of the recognizing what his challenges were and building upon his strengths, so that he could keep building upon that even further. And that's where communication is definitely key. It's difficult sometimes to do a daily communication log with caregivers and educators, but if you've got some extremely challenging behaviors, I would strongly recommend it. Even between parents, communicating what's going on with the child. Knowing that, you know, my husband comes home and one of my children have had a difficult day. I'm gonna put dogs away. I'll be right back.
So while she's doing that, be thinking of some questions, I think, or I don't know, to ask Mary.
Okay, I'm sorry. Do we have any questions? I know Bart had asked about that.
Well, I just asked them, you know, while you stepped away, to just kind of be thinking about some questions that you may already have. I'm not seeing any. Go ahead and put in the question box or the chat box, or raise your hand and I will unmute you. But this is all really good information, Mary. I personally have not, I don't have experience in this area as far as parenting or working closely with a child with special needs. So one person said, I missed the beginning. Could you share Mary's background here in the chat box? But I'm going to let Mary do that because I think that's important. And one of the things that as I'm listening to you and know a little bit about your background and history, what if you are a parent or a foster parent out there, what are some must-haves, I think, in their toolbox?
Patience.
Right, but sometimes that's hard.
It goes away. It definitely does. I will fully admit there are days that I sat in my closet and cried, thinking that the challenges that my kids had were sometimes more than I was able to parent. And recognizing that, grieving what could have been, what should have been, is a huge part of it. And knowing, you know, there's that that old story about when someone has discovered that they are pregnant with a child with Down syndrome, and how they wanted to go to Holland and they didn't go to Holland, and it's that metaphor about it's different but it's okay. There's a lot of different emotions and processes that you go through that you just kind of face them when you face them. Nancy, I started writing to you what my background was, and very briefly, I'll just let you know that I am an adoptive parent of 4 kids. 3 of them are a sibling group that were prenatally exposed to drugs and alcohol. So they've had different special needs challenges, and then I'm also the director of prevention initiatives for Minnesota Communities Caring for Children in northern Minnesota. So that's the brief version. Go ahead, Barbie, you were starting to ask something.
Yep, and now I'm trying to remember what what that was, but thank you for answering her question.
Yep. So to get back on this, communication is key, and having that communication with the people who are in your children's life, whether it's a therapist or a counselor or a skills worker or your parents or grandparents or anybody who's in your life, having that communication about what's going on is going to be very, very important in meeting their needs, because and I'll get into this in a little bit, some of this will obviously behaviors come out, and behaviors are part of that whole cognitive triangle that I'll discuss in a little bit too. So when you can have as many, especially with schools, if you can have regular team meetings to assess the progress and establish goals, even if it's just touching base, saying, Max did great, got his homework handed in, or, making sure that I tell the teacher that I saw Max do his work, it's in his backpack, please make sure that he gets it out of there and into the classroom, because sometimes it would get lost in transportation. In his mind, the way it worked was he had his work done. I did my work. I did the assignment, not connecting that it needed to go further and be like turned in or graded or any of those sort of things. In his mind, it was done, so it was out of his mind. And understanding that and helping others to understand that is going to be key. Yep. Parents as partners. I think whether you've got a neurotypical child or a child with special needs, this is important. Parents and caregivers are the people who are the most involved. They need that team approach. They need to be heard. They need to be, whether you're a foster parent or your grandparent or whatever the case is, however you are caring for and involved in a child with special needs in their life. This is important. It's this team approach. Being heard is huge. Parents know their children best, obviously. I mean, they're the ones that are there the most. They see what happens the most, and they understand how they respond the best. And being able to share that and being heard as that is vital. So having that communication and using that team approach. And then as someone else in their lives, whether you're a social worker or a therapist or a teacher, whatever your role is, greeting those parents with those successes is huge. We know as parents, we know the shortcomings, we know the challenges, we know the frustrations, we know the areas that we lose sleep over at night. So greeting us with successes of our children is important. It helps us to remember those positives. It helps us to focus on those things and see the growth that does happen when sometimes we're so close you can't see it. So greeting them with successes. Me still hearing years later about my older son's ability to help roof the house down the road, and what all of our parish members felt about him and how thrilled they were with that, still thrills me. I mean, that still makes me smile, and it still touches my heart, and it's nice to know that that's the memory that they have, and that's the thoughts that they have. Acknowledging the struggles that parents have, recognizing that there are moms who do hide in their closets and cry, that there are dads who really struggle with not having their dreams that they expected to have for their child necessarily be able to come true. That there are there is that grief process, and acknowledging that it's really hard. As an educator, you've got this child in your room for 8 hours a day, and you're struggling with this child, and then they spend the rest of the 18, 16 hours, whatever, I can't count today, hours at home, and those are the struggles that the parents have as well. You do get a break from it. The parents don't get a break from it. And recognizing that there are those low points and that they need support as well. And that can be done through involving the parents in the problem-solving process, making sure that you're letting them know, this is a challenge I'm seeing with your child in therapy or in classroom, and what do you suggest? Asking for input, involving them in the problem-solving. I can't support what the school does. If my child misbehaves at school, I can't support what they do if I don't know about it, or if they're using an approach that I know is not going to get through to my child. One of the things with Max was quite often he's attention deficit, and one of the things with him is they often put kids at the back of or at the front of the room, so they're up by the teacher, so that they're not distracted. Well, for Max, that doesn't work. Max is got some anxiety issues as well, and what works best for him is to be sitting at the back of the classroom so he can see everybody in front of him. And that way, if he hears a noise or notices something, he's seeing where it's coming from, and then he doesn't have to be anxious and hypervigilant about what's happening where he can't see it. And it works so much better for him. And it totally blew some of the teachers away over the years as they implemented this. And I'd have to fight for this almost every year, because every teacher feels that having them up front was the best thing. And I'm trying to tell them, nope, that doesn't work. So involving me in the problem-solving process helped figure that out. And then sharing resources, whether it's between parents, between the schools, having that communication and sharing those resources that you're learning in counseling or therapy for your child, and being able to implement them at home as well as at school or in a sports environment or whatever the case may be, is going to be very, very key to having some success. So they really are, parents really are, caregivers are the partners in this. So some general guidelines is determining the child's developmental level. Like I had said, my kids kind of ran about 3 years behind developmentally, primarily emotionally. Sometimes physically they were behind, just growth issues that they're all kind of growing into now. And understanding where that is at, so that you are appropriately working with and having expectations for that child that are in line with their developmental level. So you need to adapt your expectations. If I've got a 15-year-old who is emotionally is 9, I can't expect him to handle situations that a 15-year-old, a neurotypical 15-year-old would, or have him to have the ability to respond to something that a neurotypical would. So adapting my expectations of what he can deliver and what she can deliver is going to be key. And my dogs are barking they're knocking on the door. Focusing on their strengths. Especially as children get older that have special needs, they understand their differences. They begin to see the differences between their classmates and themselves, and recognizing that they don't always meet those expectations that people have. So focusing on their strengths is going to be vital as well, in letting them have those areas of success and knowing how to best respond to that so that they can feel good about themselves, so that you're continually building their self-esteem. And then a big one is changing the way you interpret their behaviors. And I do have a slide that's coming up on that kind of talks about it a little bit more. And it does discuss the cognitive triangle as well, because their thoughts and their feelings are going to be indicative of what their behaviors are. And it's all going to kind of rotate around, and understanding how to interpret their behaviors and the way you respond to them is very key. My youngest child is also adopted. We aren't really sure if she was prenatally exposed or not, but I operate under the assumption that she probably was. when she was younger, she would get I would start to notice that she'd get very frustrated, and she would start getting irritated while she was playing with other kids, whether it was her siblings or others. She'd start getting a little bit mean. I could see it kind of building up, just this tension building up in her. And so I started paying attention to it and recognizing that she needed breaks. Because if I didn't catch that, she would literally have 4-hour screaming tantrums. She would stay in her room. She would at least do that, but she'd scream the entire time. She would never tire herself out. And it was just all these emotions had built up, and she didn't know how to deal with them. So her behavior started to be negative, and I learned quickly to how to respond to that sooner. I could see when she was starting to get that way, and then I would just pull her aside, and I wouldn't make it a negative thing. I'd be like, okay, it's time for a snack now. And then have her sit by me and have a snack, and then I'd let her go back and play once I could see that she had kind of self-calmed herself anyway and kind of gotten out of that buildup. And there were times where that wasn't possible, and those were the times where we pretty much always had a 4-hour tantrum. But figuring that out and helping her as she got a little bit older, when I first noticed it, she was a little too young to understand some of it. But then as she got older, I was able to talk to her about what she noticed physically. You know, I noticed this, do you see that? And then she'd kind of recognize it. And she's now at an age where she's 11 and she understands. I just need to go to my room right now because, man, you guys are driving me nuts and my level's up here. And thankfully, we haven't had any hissy fits for years. And she's been able to understand that. But and I could have interpreted her behavior as just being a typical, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, terrible twos, terrible threes, not understanding how to share and social skills and all that sort of stuff, instead of looking at it deeper and seeing that it was an emotional response to whatever was going on. Children often have problems preparing for transitions. Changes are not easy for kids with special needs. They get involved, they're enjoying what they're doing right that moment, and they don't want it to end. So it's hard to move in a classroom setting from, hey, we're having fun in gym, and now it's time to stop and go to math. So helping them understand those transitions and preparing for them, whether it's using timers or certain keywords that they've learned to associate with that, giving them a little extra time, letting them know that, it's 5 minutes until you have to brush your teeth, so that they can kind of wind down from that. It's 5 minutes until bedtime now, or having those routines and preparing transitions with a routine is going to be very helpful. And then providing a supportive environment, and that's kind of, I say that in a lot of different ways throughout this, but it's really being supporting them and strengths focused, and having the things in place so that they are successful, so that they feel successful, so that you as a parent or an educator can see the success that they are achieving in spite of some of the challenges that they may have. So this is the cognitive triangle, and it all kind of just keeps rotating back and forth, where they have a feeling, like maybe they're feeling left out by someone ignoring them in school, and so then they start having thoughts, and they might think, well, that person doesn't like me, and or she's ignoring me, or whatever, and then I'll have a behavior related to those thoughts that, well, she doesn't like me anyway, so I'm gonna go up and kick her, or she's ignoring me, so I'm gonna do something really obnoxious so that she pays attention to me, and then those feelings move into different feelings and different thoughts, and it keeps going like that. So recognizing that their behaviors are coming from a place of either a thought or a feeling or both, and that's how they're responding. Any behavior is their method of letting you know something's not right. Something's not sitting right with them, something's not feeling right, something's not being thought right about them, and they don't have necessarily the words to deliver that. So they want to make sure that you know, and they're going to do it in behaviors, because that's the most basic and simple way that they can have things be seen. I do a lot of work with foster kids, and that's one of the things that I try and emphasize with my foster families, is that if you're seeing a behavior, they're telling you something isn't right. And it's up to you as the adult and the team approach, whether it's social worker, guardian ad litem, counselors, everybody involved in this child's life, biological parents, family members, whatever. You've got to figure out why that behavior is there. What's it coming from? What feeling or thought is it coming from? And that's a hard thing to keep in mind and not take personally sometimes. It can be frightening sometimes with some kids and their behaviors, and feeling very threatened, and helping to understand that they're coming from a place of something that's making them react this way, and it's up to us to figure out why. And it's not an excuse. It's not, carte blanche. Okay, well, you're feeling this way, so it's okay you did that. You still work with them on finding more appropriate methods of expressing themselves and helping them recognize that. But it's up to us as the adults in the equation to figure out why those behaviors are there. What's the behavior coming from? And sometimes those can be translated. Some of them might be like if they're getting fidgety during an assignment, maybe they don't know what to do. They might have only heard a part of the assignment lesson, or that they were supposed to do questions 1 through 5 and then questions 10 through 15, odd numbers or something, and it all gets confusing. So the easiest way to respond to that is, I don't know what to do, then I'm going to just do something that's distracting. I'm going to distract myself. I'm going to distract the person next to me. They're going to, get fidgety, anxious. My son Max was a big one for doing this with his hands and just getting very anxious. Now he takes off his glasses a lot. He's learned to kind of do things that are a little bit less noticeable. If they're hitting a child in line, it could be just a simple response that, well, they bumped me first, so I bumped them back, and not realizing that it's as excessive as it is. They can repeat the instructions, and my kids were classic for this. They could repeat it, anything I would tell them to do, but then they wouldn't be able to do it. And it's because they don't know how to put that into action. They need it broken down a little bit more simply. It might be step by step and not steps all at once. I found the best way to, especially when my kids were younger, to have them clean their room. I couldn't tell them to just go in and clean their room. I had to tell them to go in and do one thing in particular. So I would have them go in and say, okay, pick up all the clothes on the floor. And they could do that. They would not be able to tell you if they were dirty or clean, so then I'd have to do that part of it. But at least all the clothes were in one spot. And then we could work on that. Okay, now pick up all your cars, or pick up all the Legos, and having one specific thing, very detailed, so that they would know what to do, and they could be successful at it. And then it's a little more work on my end, because I have to keep telling them what the next step is, but it got done, and they learned how to do it, and they learned to compartmentalize and organize a little bit more. Their behavior becoming upset or unfocused with a schedule change. That's that transition thing where they don't really know what to do and how to do it. They don't know how to move their mind from that to the next step. You can think of yourself during work when you're doing something that you're very intently working on, whether it's responding to an email or typing a report or anything like that, and you get interrupted. It's hard to get back, and you feel that little resentment that, phone's ringing, I have to answer it. And you're interrupted from your flow, and that's how they are too. I mean, it's interrupting for them. It becomes an unfocusable moment for them. They aren't able to pull it back as easily as we can, and when we are neurotypical. So some of those modifications that you can do, children with special needs may be over or undersensitive to their surroundings. Max sitting at the back of the classroom was a perfect example of, he needed to see those things so that he didn't get hypervigilant and anxious about them even more so. Kids may not have the language to say what is different for them, so they'll communicate that through their behaviors. Again, that's that feelings and thoughts that they don't know how to express necessarily, and so they bring it out in behaviors. So the environments needed to be modified to support people with special needs. Behaviors often change when environments are modified, and this kind of, it works for home and for school for some of these things. Using visual strategies, having a very clear place where things are so that they know what it is. This picture has words, but if you're dealing with younger children, you could have pictures of them, of what things go certain places, so that they can have that success and know that when they're putting away their socks, all the socks go in this drawer. And they can see that from the outside, because a drawer is closed and they can't see what's inside, so it doesn't mean anything what's under there. They need to see visually what may be. having visual cue cards for chores, for things like brushing your teeth, that you put the toothpaste on the toothbrush and then the toothbrush in your mouth, can be a huge thing. My kids, Max was great at showering, but he would never use soap or shampoo. He didn't realize that was part of it. He'd be scrubbing his head and everything, but he had no soap or shampoo in there. So learning those sorts of steps and understanding the processes that go with it, teaching them that organization. And that will be probably a very big struggle for a lot of people, because so many times things are, the parts of the brain that are impacted either through trauma or physical disabilities or developmental delays or anything, deals with that executive functioning and the ability to organize and have those clear-cut lines and divisions. A lot of kids have auditory strategies that they need to have implemented, especially in school, like fire drills. You don't think about that all the time. And I never would have thought of it until a couple of years ago, when a friend of mine has a daughter who really can't handle when the fire drills go off. I mean, it will throw her for a loop for days. It will just completely pull her apart. So what they've implemented with that is, when they know that they're having a fire drill, when they have a scheduled fire drill, they remove her from the school. They bring her outside, or they go somewhere else, and they let her know that it's coming, so that, because she's still going to hear it, but prepare her for it. Prepare her when you can. I mean, obviously in a case of emergency, that's not going to happen, and that's okay. But what you can control, you can control. You play soft music, relaxing music for the group or individually. Just have that kind of as a background thing. If you have a child that doesn't mind that, there's going to be some kids where the slightest little extra noise is going to be too much. And then they would need ear protectors or noise reducing materials. And people are becoming more and more aware of these different strategies that you can use. Quiet spaces are really nice. If there's a spot, like in a classroom, that you can just have a little tent that, you know, a child can go to when they're feeling overwhelmed, or that it's too noisy, or it's just too much, and fully knowing that they're going to go in there and use that space, even at home. My youngest daughter, the one who would get so anxious and get so ramped up, to this day, she's 11 now, she has a little cubby that she has built in her closet, and that's her little area. And she's got a little lamp that goes in there, and she's got blankets and pillows and different things in there, and that's just her place. That's her quiet space that she goes to and just does whatever it is she does. I know she does a lot of reading in there. That's why the light's in there. But she's always just kind of created her own little soft space that is just hers, that she can go to, and we don't interrupt if we don't need to. And I think it's kind of her calming place for her. And having that at school is important for kids that are dealing with so many different sensory issues and challenges in trying to keep up and maintain social interactions and do all the things that are expected of them in this short amount of time. Having that quiet space can be very important for them in that sort of setting. Tactile strategies, fidget spinners, they came out because of children with needing those tactile strategies and needing those anxiety reducing skills and tools. So they're very important, and I think that people are recognizing that a little bit more. I know fidget spinners are not my favorite thing because my kids tend to spin them and then they go shooting across the room. But in theory, that was the same thing that Max was doing with his fingers when he was kind of going like this. He was getting his sensory need that he had, that tactile strategy he needed to calm himself. And we've found other ways. Some kids need chewy things. A lot of kids will chew on their shirts or their sleeves, ties on their hoodies or things like that, and have a lot of oral things that they want to do, chewing on pencils, chewing on all sorts of things, and having chew toys, whether it's a necklace or, you know, I mean, it sounds silly, but even like, you know, like baby rings that they have for teething, kids need those later. They have that need. You can't always have a child be chewing on stuff, so if they can have gum and they can use it appropriately, great. If they, you know, caramels are a good one. It's that chewing motion that is part of our brain development that creates different attachments even, and it's a necessary part of development. and it can enhance the learning and attention during group activities. We talk a great deal as adults now when we go to different webinars and presentations and trainings about adult styles of learning. And we have different things out. We'll have fidget toys out, or we'll have pen and paper so that people can doodle or whatever, because a lot of people can do different things at the same time. And children are the same way. And finding what those different strategies are all designed to help them enhance that learning process. I had mentioned earlier that, to me, when my children were younger, the social skills part was a huge impact and an important part of what I wanted in their life. And by supporting those social skills, it creates so many more opportunities. The ability to have a consistent routine. Many people understand the need to, not that you have to eat every single night at 6 o'clock, but you have a relative time that you're going to eat dinner at. There's a relative time that kids are going to go to bed at. They have those expectations. Those become consistent. They become their routine. And then when there's changes to that, it can throw them off. And the same with school. And that's where those transition timing strategies can come into place. Review and demonstrate the rules with the kids. Let them know what their expectations are, what you expect out of them, what they can expect out of you as a response. When there's that unwanted behavior, it's typically a cue that the environment needs to be adapted. Something's not right, something's too loud, too much, too noisy, too smelly, too whatever, too triggering for what is happening in their lives. And then helping them identify and label those feelings. Like I did with my daughter, helping her to, as I saw her do these things, it'd be like, I would talk to her when I pull her over for a snack, because if I pulled her over and just said, hey, Nina, it looks like you need to calm down, she'd be all, eh. So that didn't work. So I'd sit her down on a different pretext of, let's just take a break and have a snack, and then I'd talk to her about what I was observing, and so that she could learn to identify those things and recognize them herself as she became older and it became more age appropriate. And maintaining that consistency with the people who typically interact with your child. So, not moving from counselor to therapist to skills worker, and changing them out 3 times a year. Having that consistency, having that routine and that presence, which is hard with school because you typically change teachers each year. But if you're in a school setting where they can at least see the old teacher the previous year, that can be very helpful. Having them be acknowledged by that person, knowing that that relationship continues, especially for children who have been in foster care. It can be very difficult to trust that the adult that I love right now is going to be the adult that's still here next year that I love, and that I care about, and that cared about me. So having that consistency with people who typically interact will be important. Dealing with consequences, because behaviors doesn't mean that they get away with it just because we understand that there's a reason why the behavior. There's appropriate responses, and there are responses that require a little bit more depth to them. And a word about consequences, we really want, especially for special needs kids, because they're very black and white, that there's not a gray area, that they directly understand the behavior and the means of correcting. And it's not punishing. It is correcting that behavior, using proactive and preventative approaches before it happens, like I was doing with my daughter, recognizing that she was starting to get stressed. And then I have the target on here because that's really a kind of a good way of understanding where kids are at the moment. And while we say we want things to happen as soon as possible, you need to understand where that child is at that moment. You can't implement a consequence or have a discussion about what's happening if they're in a red zone and they are just totally mentally shut off. Their brain is just, they flip their lid, with the whole brain child type stuff, that they're not there. They're not going to hear a word you've got to say. It would be like me trying to talk to my daughter when she was having her temper tantrums. There was no reaching what she was doing. She had to just kind of get out of that when she got out of it. So understanding that a child is in the green and you can directly address those behaviors. You can directly correct those responses and talk about them. They're in green, it's good, it's go. Yellow means they might need a little bit of time. You know, they need to calm down, they feel hurt, they've gotten their feelings hurt, they've been offended, whatever the case may be, they need to calm from that, but they can come back to it relatively soon. Just give them a little space. And then, like I said, red is way out there. They need a day at least, or at least a longer sense of time. When you're doing consequences, be as consistent as possible. I did mention, you know, about being immediate, reminding children what the consequences are for. Having it be kind of a natural, direct relation is going to help. And again, keeping in mind with that immediate that they need to be in the green zone in order to do that. Social stories are huge. That worked so awesome with my oldest son of the sibling group. He could never understand if I sat him down and said, Jake, you know, you were picking on your brother, and you know, this can't happen, or whatever. Jake was a food hoarder when he was younger, and so I started making up a story about Chuck the monkey. And Chuck the monkey did everything that Jake was doing, but it wasn't me talking about Jake, it was me talking about this other entity. And he could see what needed to be done. He offered suggestions on what Chuck the monkey could do so that he would not, you know, take the food that we needed for dinner the next day. It allowed him to be step back from it and not feel pressured or pointed at, and it helped to break it down so that we could move past it and so that he could learn from it. And it was not this pinpointed finger pointing type thing. Break those consequences down into smaller, more manageable pieces. If they are not going to have electronics, you need to let them know what that means. Does that mean every piece of electronics in the house, or does it mean that you can't have your phone, or that you can't watch TV, or you can't listen to your iPad or your iPod, or you know, any of those things? Breaking it down so that they understand exactly what's going on, and it's very concrete. That if it's for one day, that it's one day. It's not, oh yeah, I forgot, so now it's another day. Or you did this after that, so now you've got it added. You made very clear and concrete consequences for behaviors. I often have a problem with schools when having a general discipline rule as far as kids with special needs, because it's not the same. These kids aren't the same, and addressing where they can fit into that and where they can't fit into that is a good tool at the beginning of the school year, especially if your child's got some behaviors that might be classified as you know, needing some consequences. Being repetitive and routine, having that repetition and routine in their lives, what they can know what to expect and when to expect it, and aren't feeling like that they're being thrown for a loop because something new popped up. But also at the same time kind of preparing for that. Sometimes there are things that have never happened before, so we can't plan for. But having that routine and repetition, knowing that, all right, if I don't get my homework in, I don't get to, you know, have an extra milk at break time or something. I'm not thinking of a very good consequence right now. But I never want to see kids have recess removed if possible. It's so important to them to be able to get that energy out, get that oxygen going to their brain and moving and running and jumping and playing and interacting. That, to me, that's one of the poorest consequences that people can do, that schools can do. And that's just my personal opinion, but you know, keeping in mind that they know what the consequences are, and it's very repetitive, it's very routine, they know what to expect.
Excuse me, Mary.
Yes.
I just want to mention that we know that it is 1 o'clock, and our time was scheduled until 1, but I do not want to rush you because you have such great information, great experience.
And I can promise you I'm almost done.
Oh, okay. All right. So we have one question I just want to throw in there in case Nancy has to leave. Any tips, strategies to share regarding communicating with a parent when you have a concern? So I'm assuming she's either a teacher, educator of some kind, maybe a foster parent, making a referral. I had that question too. What referrals maybe are available for professionals or teachers, or So all these strategies before a diagnosis.
Yep. And it can be really hard. I would definitely acknowledge that as a parent who adopted kids, I knew the challenges that were there. But my oldest son, my biological son, is attention deficit, and when he started school and we started seeing, I always knew he was pretty active and kind of annoying at times. And once we got to school, we found out, that there was these issues, and you do feel very personal, and it can be a very difficult thing to have to approach with parents, especially if they're not expecting it. And you do take it personal. So I think trying to really build that relationship with the parent as much as possible, even if that takes a little time before you can jump right in and say what's going on, but kind of creating that relationship so that they feel that you're someone who's coming from a place of caring and trust. My initial reaction when teachers started telling me about my son was, no, he's just active, and took it personally. And then as I developed the relationship with his teacher, I could see, and she brought in those concerns about, his social interactions with other students and how he's being alienated, and I could see it in him, and then I started moving past me and focusing on what was best for him. So approaching it in a manner of really coming from the child's point of view and what you want to see as best for that child, and offering solutions with that, whether it's talking with a pediatrician or a mental health practitioner. There's always a possibility of meds. I'm not going to get into that personally. My kids were on meds, and it was a huge help for them, and they recognized that, and I would do it again. My oldest son still is mad at me for putting him on meds, but I keep telling him I would have done it again anyway. It was what they needed, and recognizing that there are different ways to do that. Sometimes diet can make a difference, and just offering all of those things as options, and providing information and resources so that parents can investigate it on their own. So I hope that kind of answers that. So to just quickly finish up, what I want you guys to do is look, listen, and learn. Children find it hard to understand what they're feeling and expressing it. They don't understand why they're doing it that way. They just know that they are. It's that cognitive triangle again. These kids may not be very good at reading other people's social cues, facial expressions. I mean, I know that when my kids started in counseling that they do the little face things, and happy, sad, and angry, and that's basically the three emotions that they could read. So anything in between there, anything that was subtle, anything that was a variation off those three main things, was very difficult for them to understand, and they didn't recognize it. And they may be extremely reactive to any perceived threat. So that cognitive triangle again kicks in with their feelings and their thoughts and their emotions and their behaviors. Just because Sally walked by and didn't say hi to me doesn't mean she doesn't like me anymore. She might have had something on her mind, and thinking about what she needed to do for class, as opposed to that she saw you and just ignored you. They can be extremely reactive to things. So your responses matter. And as educators, as counselors, as social workers, as parents, you want to differentiate yourself from others in the child's past, especially if they've had a traumatic past. Differentiate yourself from the people who have been angry or rejecting or simply absent in their lives. Tune into your child's emotions and help him or her define and express their feelings. Set that appropriate example of emotional expression and behavior. And it's not saying you have to be perfect all the time. I am the first one to apologize to my kids when I screw up, because I do. I'm human, and I learn as I kind of go too. And there are some things that I've never experienced or parented before, and my child will throw it at me, and I've got to do what I can. And when I do it wrong, or where I could have done it better, I let them know. I could have done this better. I didn't respond appropriately. I didn't react the way I should have, or whatever the case may be. But I'm trying to let them know that, we're human, we make mistakes, and we move on from that, and we learn from that. And that we all need forgiveness at times, and that we're all still learning. And then encouraging that positive expression and behavior by supporting your child's strengths and interests. That kind of ties to me, it kind of ties back into that grief process with grieving what could have been or should have been. I've got kids with many, many talents that are different from my own, that may be different from what I hoped that they would have. And they have different interests, and recognizing their strengths, their interests, and promoting those as opposed to what I want for them. I've got one child who's very artistic, and I am not. I struggle drawing a stick figure, and finding the ways to best support that is a challenge for me, to know how to keep nurturing that. Another child is very interested in sports and has zero athletic ability, but the interest is there, and he wants to succeed, so that's what we allow him to try and do his best at, and supporting that interest, even if it's not necessarily what I know would be best. But I respond to him in a positive manner and support that, and do what I can to help with that. And essentially, I really want you guys to be the kind of person you needed when you were younger. We all know those days we had when we were younger, that we really just wanted this, that, or the other thing, needed someone to just accept and love and acknowledge and listen and hear. And so if we can be those kind of person that you needed when you were younger for your child, or the child in your life, is going to make a huge difference. So that is what I've got today. If anybody would like a certificate of attendance, we don't have CEU credits, but I can provide you with a certificate of attendance. Please put your email in the chat box if you can, or let me know. My contact information is on the screen. You can email me, and we will send out certificates of attendance to anybody who needs them. Also, I believe, and Barb, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we will be sending out a SurveyMonkey survey.
They will get a survey tomorrow, right? And also, if along with that email, let Mary know if you want a PDF copy of her PowerPoint. She won't be able to send you the PowerPoint, but she can send you a PDF copy of that. Also, this has been recorded and will be able to view again on the MCCC website very soon. Oh, we've so so with the dogs and all, you know what? That's real life. So I'm getting messages. Great job, Mary. Thank you very much. Getting some emails. Thank you. Keep putting them in. You can put them in the question box too. That's okay. I would like a certificate. Okay, can do that. Just looking. I just want to give people a chance to even raise their hand if they have any questions. We truly appreciate you hanging in there with us. We went, excuse me, about 10 minutes over, but Mary, you have a lot of good information, and I know you have, believe me, I know you have a lot more, so to squeeze everything in an hour was really good.
Yes, there is. There's lots. So if anybody has any questions that you'd like to shoot at me or anything like that privately, feel free. I'm more than happy to do what I can. So I want to thank you all for being here and attending and participating, and I truly appreciate it. And I hope you were able to learn something or take something home from this and be able to use that with the kids in your lives.
For me, I think it's really another step to understanding, or even trying to understand or empathize with parents who are dealing with this every single 24/7.
Oh yeah. Yep. Remember that they might be hiding in their closet.
Right. And that's okay.
It is.
Create that little shelf, put a little light in there. That's okay.
I thought about doing that, and I actually bought a lamp, but I never did put it in there.
No, all good. So
yes, it is. I mean, and he's a fantastic kid now, and it sometimes amazes me how different the relationship is. So
Right.
it's like, yes, can get there. But if it doesn't, that's okay too
How do
sometimes.
you know? How do you, and then this is just me personally, how do you know when it's like, yep, we need to take you in to, I wouldn't even know where to, so I do know of a 9-year-old who's struggling, but I have no idea who to talk to, who to contact, what kind or type of doctor to go see. I mean, I don't know any of
You can
that.
always start out with your pediatrician, and that's usually the person who knows your child already because you've probably maintained that relationship. And that he or she will be able to offer lots of different suggestions, and they might be able to do or handle the things that you've done right there.
Okay.
Most of my kids, I think they all started out with going to the pediatrician, and then eventually I moved them to um, they have nurse practitioners now that monitor their meds. So,
Okay. Okay.
but that's always a good safe spot to start.
All right. And if I'm a huge advocate, I think, for parents, and if they're having a hard time with the school or a teacher or the system or what advice, thought do you have for that?
I think there's Pacer is one of the organizations that really work with schools and parents, and that's a Minnesota available one.
Hmm.
Um, and they have different advocates that will work with parents, especially with like IEPs, individual education plans. There are you could have a children's mental health case manager, um, other parents. There's different
Right.
support groups and organizations that are available. Lots of groups on Facebook. You could probably just type in anything and find a connection that's relatively local. Um, Other parents of children with special needs, they are a huge resource for families, especially when they're first starting to navigate through this, and knowing what your rights are, because there's a lot of things that I learned from my first child, who's 33 now, to my youngest, who's 11. A lot of differences in what I learned in IEPs over the years, and how to handle them and address them and work with them and get what my child needs while still maintaining what the school needs to have done, and having it
Hmm.
be a workable document for everybody that's involved in it instead of just a select few.
Hmm. I might have missed it. You might have already said it. IEP. What is that?
Individual education plan.
Okay. Through schools.
Yep. And then there's also 504 plans, and that they have less criteria to meet um, to qualify for that. And
Okay.
it's when they just need a little something extra.
Hmm.
So,
Right. Even just having the instructions read instead of like on a test or
yes.
something, and that
Yep.
that's written, they're written problems.
Yep.
They're tough for me.
Yeah. And
So,
one thing that I had implemented with my youngest was we did modified homework assignments. Homework was a huge stressor for us, and
mhm,
it was terrible. I mean, our evenings just deteriorated from the second they came in the door. Um, they were stressed about it. I'd get stressed about it. We're trying to get it all done. Everybody's yelling, "Ugh," and it just
mhm,
wasn't a good situation. So we modified their homework assignments to be like, if the class was given 20 questions, maybe my child got 15
mhm,
or 10, and the teacher would pick out which questions that they'd have, so that they were ensuring that they were learning the strategies and learning what they needed to keep up with the class without having to do the extra busy work.
mhm.
And I think that's part of the reason why Max is doing so excellent this year, is because it made it a smaller task for him. It wasn't this huge thing. It was 10 questions instead of 20. And then as he could handle more, we built in a little bit more, and it
Mhm,
was
mhm.
playing to his strengths and meeting his needs where he was at, and providing him the opportunity to grow with it. So,
There are still a few people left on the webinar, and please raise your hand if you want to ask Mary a question or a comment or anything. I will unmute you. This is your opportunity. Otherwise, I'm not seeing any additional questions. And
Yep.
great job. Thank you very much. Oh, do you have other handouts? Yes, the PDF PowerPoint would be good, but do you have other handouts that you could possibly share?
Yeah, there's things that I could pull that I can send with too for people that would like it. Yep.
Okay. All right. With that, I think we will stop. And again, thank you to those who are left. Thank you for
Thank
joining.
you.
Yep. And Mary, thank you. Good job.
Thank you.